Welcome to the GSMC Financial News Podcast, the show that delves into the ups and downs of the stock market, changes in the economy, and news from the worlds of real estate and technology. From breaking news on the New York Stock Exchange, NASDAQ, or the overseas market, to updates on the bond market, if there's money to be made, we've got you covered.
What's going on in some very interesting IPOs. Have a special guest to talk about what's going on in the world of K-pop. Then we're going to look at the IPO of one of K-pop's biggest talent agencies. Next, we're going to look at what's going on with the airline industry because they've got a major deadline looming this week. And finally, I'm going to bring you the top 10 wealthiest boy bands in the world ever. Before I go on, give you my normal disclaimer. This show is for entertainment purposes only. I'm not providing legal, financial, or tax advice, so don't come at me. The economy is changing by the second. So as always, if you have any questions, visit an attorney, tax consultant, or financial professional for advice tailored to your needs. Now let's get to it. Stock futures opened higher on Monday evening after a rally during the regular session that gave the three major indices a strong start to the week at the tail end of a weak September. Contacts on the S&P 500 ticked up as overnight trading kicked off after the index posted its biggest one-day gain in more than 2 weeks earlier in the day. The rally was broad-based and led by the energy and financial sectors, the laggards the year to date. The quiet move in futures follows a solid start to the weeks for stocks during Monday's session, with the Dow rising 410 points, or 1.5%, the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ rose 1.6% and 1.9% respectively. Monday's rally set up the market to snap losing streaks. The Dow and the S&P 500 have fallen for 4 consecutive weeks. The NASDAQ composite managed to break its own 3-week streak with a 1% gain last week. The climb for stocks on Monday came after mixed reviews about the coronavirus response over the weekend. On the bullish side of the market, Florida lifted capacity restrictions on restaurants over the weekend, and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said that she believed another relief bill was still on the table. I am not going to believe anything until I see it, but hopefully we're going to get some relief. However, coronavirus cases in the U.S. continue to rise once again, with Dr. Anthony Fauci saying on Monday that the U.S. is not in a good place as colder weather approaches. Elsewhere, market participants on Tuesday will be closely watching the first of 3 debates ahead of the presidential election, with President Donald Trump set to face off against former Vice President Joe Biden in Cleveland, Ohio, for a 90-minute session starting at 9 p.m. Eastern. Topics to be discussed include the records of Trump and Biden, the Supreme Court, COVID-19, the economy, race and civil unrest, and election integrity. The Nonpartisan Commission on Presidential Debates announced last week. So we're all going to be keeping a close eye on what's going on in Cleveland on Tuesday to really see where this country stands. In other news, investors have shown rabid enthusiasm for new stocks this September. That's forced some strategists to wonder, is this another repeat of the frenzy that led up to the dot-com crash at the turn of the millennium? And having lived through the dot-com crash, I happen to see a lot of similarities. So we've got a lot of tech stocks that are rising really quickly, but we just need to keep an eye on it and make sure that we're not overreaching. what is happening globally is that it's been a blockbuster month for initial public offerings, with deals worth $38.2 billion listing on exchanges according to Deal Logic. That's the biggest September by value on record. Mike Novogratz, founder and CEO of Galaxy Digital Holdings, said there's a big imbalance right now in supply and demand, given how many new offerings are coming to market during a period of high insider selling. You've got all the signs that we're in some speculative mania, Novogratz said on CNN. One example is that some analysts have flagged concerns about Planeter, the secretive Silicon Valley data analytics company co-founded by Peter Thiel that's due to start trading on the exchange this Wednesday. The Wall Street Journal reports that the company could be valued at nearly $22 billion in its trading debut. That is a pretty high price tag for a company that has never turned a profit. Workspace app Asana, which is due to list shares on Wednesday as well on the New York Stock Exchange, is generating a lot of conversation as well. New listings, particularly in the tech sector, have been of such interest during the pandemic because where else are you going to put your cash? You know, everything's virtual right now. We've got all this money washing around because of the huge stimulus we've seen by central banks. People don't really know where else to put their money. So there's no guarantee that prices are going to keep going up because who knows what's around the corner for us. Another round of coronavirus? Who knows? Another company that is leading its IPO this week is Big Hit Entertainment, which is a Korean company that is the founder of BTS. And I'm going to get into that a little bit further in the next segment. But first, I want to introduce you to my special guest, K-pop expert, my stepdaughter, A. Say hello.
Hello.
So, A, tell me a little bit about the K-pop industry.
Well, the K-pop industry is a very large industry. I think it's very successful and has grew exponentially fast, and the way it brings other people together and all of ages, countries, languages, everywhere around the world is a very important feature that comes with it. I think there's a lot of hidden things that are dangerous, but just like every other industry, especially the just American,
Interesting. So let's say I wanted to become a K-pop idol. How would I go about doing that?
Well, first you have to, there's lots of agencies in the K-pop industry that you have to audition for. Some of the main ones are JYP, SM, and Big Hit, and smaller ones along the way. There's others I probably didn't mention. However, they normally scout out people. There's a lot of live things where people go on the streets and dance and sing, and they scout out things, and then they have auditions. But the big part is once you get your trainees, which they don't know if they're going to actually become a K-pop idol, you would train with singing, rapping, dancing, and after years and years of training, you might get to debut with a group of people.
So are there specific schools, or do you just start dancing on the streets in Seoul?
Well, obviously these agencies want a large group of people to pick from. I think a lot of it is done by auditions and putting them out and scouting people out, but a lot of people, when they're younger and want to become stars, they will go to dance schools and idol school. There's one idol, it's not an idol school, but it's a popular school where many idols have gone before, successful idols, and just, I think there's, I don't know what's to it, but I know a lot of idols went to that school and became successful after. But yes, they go through a very long process.
Interesting. And tell me what you know about a day in the life of a K-pop idol.
Well, I will never get to experience that, but what I know is that it's constant and they do not get breaks. They are always practicing and doing a lot of things and they go beyond what they need to do. They have shoots, model shoots, where they do photo shoots for merchandise and deals with other companies. Some agencies are more lenient on the idols and don't make them work as hard. However, just a lot of practice. If we're talking about concert-wise,
I've heard a lot about the social media aspect of being a K-pop idol. Can you explain a little bit about how that goes?
Most K-pop groups will have an individual, not for every person, but for the group itself, Twitter account, Instagram account. Mainly Twitter is the main spot. Certain agencies will let their idols have more freedom with the social media and let them take over the accounts rather than other workers doing it for them. But for instance, if we use Big Hit Entertainment, they have their own app that is just for them, since the group BTS has their own app that is just the fans and them and nothing else. It's basically Twitter, but it's just for them. They used to use Twitter and they were more free and they would post selfies, and that's what many K-pop groups do, it's just selfies. But one huge thing with the K-pop industry is live streams. A lot of live streams on a special app called V app or YouTube. And basically they interact with their fans, and sometimes they'll have, depending on the agency, sometimes they'll have like a worker behind the camera telling them what to do or what not to say. But the freer ones normally actually get really close to the fans and grow a relationship with them. And those typically become the more popular ones.
Is it fair to say that the life of a K-pop idol is pretty strict and regimented?
Definitely they are. They have to have a strict diet, stay healthy, since the beauty standards are quite large and strict in Korea, very. And they have to practice a lot of exhaustion, and the diets, practicing, social media, what they can say and who they can be around, and things they can and cannot do and where they can go, because they do have to be quite private and can get lots of paparazzi, and there's crazy fans out there that invade their privacy, so they have a lot of restrictions.
And one final thing before we sign off here, what are your thoughts on this BTS being bought and sold on the stock market in Asia?
I don't know how it works. However, I know that they are very involved in the government. I've seen a lot of, specifically a percentage of a very large percentage, it seems like, well, what you would think of money that Korea makes in general goes to the music industry. And BTS I'm not surprised, because they own smaller companies, and I would expect they've talked to the UN, like they're very involved in a lot of things. And it's kind of a weird thing when I saying they're being bought, and what that means for them, and if that's scary or not, if that's good for them or not. But I think Big Hit has made a lot of good decisions in the past, and it might be a good thing for them.
So before I go, what's your favorite BTS song?
My favorite BTS song is, I really like the new song right now called Dynamite. And, but I would say, it's called Pied Piper. Pied Piper is probably my favorite song by BTS.
Well, there you have it. Thank you so much, A. I appreciate you being on our podcast and letting us know a little bit about the behind the scenes of the K-pop world. Coming up in my next segment, we're going to take a deeper look at what's going on with the initial public offering. And stick around to the end of the pod, and I will give you the top 10 wealthiest boy bands in history. Guest on my show today, A. And if you want more information from A, just find us on Twitter at GSMC Financial News. And I will be right back.
Bye-bye.
Are you a business owner? Someone interested in the latest news that might affect your business? Then check out the GSMC Business News Podcast, a show dedicated to keeping you up to date on all things concerning business, technology, and the stock market. Get a head start on the day as we keep you updated on the latest goings-on Wall Street, money, jobs, and technology. The GSMC Business News Podcast has you covered.
That's even after COVID-19 forced BTS to cancel its world tour. And despite the risk that some of its stars may actually have to do military service. Big Time Entertainment is issuing its shares at 135,000 won, or $115 each. In a filing on Monday, it said that it's raising 962.55 million won, or $822 million, and is valuing the company at 4.8 trillion won, or $4.1 billion. That makes the deal South Korea's largest stock offering since July of 2017. The company is run by CEO Bang Si-hook, a longtime music producer who is credited with creating BTS and setting it on the road to superstardom in 2013. Bang owns about 43% of Big Hit, according to the stock exchange filing. The IPO has made Bang a billionaire with a B. Those holdings are now worth $7.9 million each at its issue price. The shares will start actually trading on October 15th. An army of retail investors in South Korea, known as ants, is also clamoring to buy the stock, while die-hard BTS fans are bidding in hopes of securing even one share in what analysts expect to be the country's hottest listing this year. Some 1,400 institutional investors sought shares in pre-subscription offers, looking for 1,117 times the number available, the filing said. About 98% they would pay the top range price or more. Big Hit is classified as a kind of global export firm, said Park Sung-ho, an analyst at Yuanta Securities in Korea. Not only has it proven its ability to use YouTube, like A said, social media for smart market infiltration, it has its platform Weavers, which gives unprecedented clarity and control over its revenue sources for a label, and may grow into a true platform player as outside artists increasingly join. Big Hit reported a 49.7 billion won, or $42.4 million profit for the first half of 2020, as its online concert and merchandise sales on the Weverse app more than offset the cancellations during the COVID-19 pandemic. The IPO will make the 7 BTS members multimillionaire stockholders, as Big Hit CEO Bang in August gave them 68,385 shares each, worth nearly $7.9 million at issue price. The firm will raise 962.6 billion won, or $820 million, through the offer of 17.13 million new shares. The Central Bank of Korea, South Korea that is watching the offer closely, as massive oversubscription for shares could send ripples through short-term money markets. So, has BTS gone corporate? Well, they kind of always were. And, that's something that I really wanted A to share with us, is that Big Hit is a idol-making machine. Pop stars are big business, and this is South Korea's biggest stock market listing in 3 years. The commodity of boy bands is South Korea's biggest stock market listing in 3 years. That is astounding to me. So the CEO, Bang, is 48 years old, and he owns 43% of the Seoul-based music agency, while gaming company Netmarble holds 25% after investing $172 million US 2 years ago. Netmarble's founder, Bang Joon-hook, a relative of Big Hit's Bang, is already one of South Korea's richest people. Bang is also known as Hitman and founded Big Hit in 2005 after a successful career as a music producer at JYP Entertainment Corp. Initially, the business was so quiet that artists stopped by the office just to play tennis matches on the company's Nintendo Wii. After almost going bankrupt, Big Hit's first breakthrough came in 2009 when its 8 Without a Heart became a local hit. BTS officially debuted in 2013 with its single album Too Cool for School and gained global attention when it grabbed the Top Social Artist Award at the 2017 Billboard Music Awards. The group is one of the few K-pop bands to break into Western markets. Last year, BTS became only the third group in 50 years, after the Beatles and the Monkees, to have 3 number-1 albums on the Billboard 200 charts in less than 12 months. The band's success has helped Big Hit carve out a lucrative empire. Dynamite, which is one of A's favorite songs, became the number-1 song on the Billboard Hot 100 chart when it debuted in August, and was the first Asian act to top the U.S. rankings since Kayu Sakamoto Tsukaki in 1963. The band's rise is often attributed to an effective use of social media and legions of fans obsessively devoted to the band, also collectively known as the Army. BTS generated more than 97% of Big Hit sales last year and almost 88% in the first half of 2020, the IPO showed. I get questions about how BTS has become so successful, and I'm curious too. Bang said in a local TV show in 2018, "I didn't imagine a future like now when I first planned BTS. The goal wasn't to make them top artists. The coronavirus pandemic has helped to blow to the broader music industry because live concerts and performances are canceled or postponed due to social distancing and restrictions put in place to prevent the virus from spreading. And as a little bit of an editorial, I think it's irresponsible to have a concert these days, and I'm looking at you, Smash Mouth. But BTS is they're not taking the bait. They're being responsible. And BTS keeps churning out chart-topping songs and performances on shows like the MTV Video Music Awards. The band managed to raise tens of thousands of dollars by hosting a live streaming concert that drew 756,000 viewers around the globe to its own fan communication platform. And A showed us some of the clips from the concert, and honestly, it is a spectacle. If you haven't seen it, I would highly recommend doing a quick search on YouTube. Big Hit's revenue slid just 8% in the 6 months through June to 294 billion won, or $251 million United States. And concerts only accounted for less than 1% of their sales, compared with a third of their sales, according to the IPO. It also set up a content-based business model, with the group featuring in a Netmarble game and Samsung releasing a BTS edition for its Galaxy S20 smartphone series. The pandemic does remain a concern, but because the worsening or the prolonging of the health crisis could really impact the company's business plans or earnings. And BTS was responsible enough to put this, Big Hit was responsible enough to put this in their perspectives. The company derived 97% of its revenue from BTS alone last year. And they have the rights to BTS until the end of 2024. The agency's heavy reliance on BTS could also become a drawback, especially as its members still have to serve mandatory conscription. They have to serve in the military in South Korea, because all South Korean males between the age of 18 and 28 have to serve for about 2 years. BTS's oldest member, Jin, may have to postpone some of his national service until the end of 2021, and a proposed bill this month could pave the way for pop artists to delay it until they're 30. For now, though, Big Hit is seeking to expand its portfolio by striking deals with other agencies and developing new talent. It acquired K-pop group management company Bts Entertainment earlier this year and aims to launch a new group through a joint venture with CJ E&M Co. A new girl band will debut this year, the agency said, so be on the look for that. When the virus started, it was thought to be a crisis because they had to cancel almost everything that was scheduled. But it's no longer considered a crisis, Sinhan's Song said. Big Hit has shown that it can still make profits through online concerts and album sales without physical tours and concert. The boys, for their part, continue to work tirelessly around the clock, fully embracing that rock and roll lifestyle, or in this case, the K-pop lifestyle. So is BTS your favorite band? Do you want to own your very own piece of V, J-Hope, RM, Jin, Park Ji-min, Jong Kook, and Suga? Well, you don't need to be Korean to buy shares in Big Hit Entertainment, and there's no age restriction in investing. So if you have the money to spend, you can buy as little as one share. But unlike the US, you can't really buy the fractional shares that we've talked about. All you have to do is open a personal securities account or a brokerage account in advance. So this is where your stock assets will be held. Depending on where you live, you'll either need to visit your local brokerage office or apply online. Wait until today on Monday. And Big Hit has made their debut on the Korean Stock Exchange, KOSPI, in October on the 15th. And buy your shares. Once this Big Hit Entertainment goes public, you'll be able to submit an order for shares through your broker. You will probably incur transaction fees on top of the share price because this is an international trade, but That's going to be up to your broker. So you too can own your own little bit of BTS. And with that, I am going to take another quick commercial break. When we come back, we're going to shift lanes a little bit, and I'm going to talk about what's going on in the airline industry as the clock continues to tick. And stick around to the end of the podcast, and I will give you the top 10 wealthiest boy bands of all time.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching.
Hey!
The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back. In our last segment, we talked about the IPO of one of the biggest bands in the world, Big Hit Entertainment, and their biggest product, BTS. In this segment, I want to switch gears and look at what's going on in the airline industry. It's been one of the toughest industries after the pandemic struck, and the clock is really ticking for them. Back in March, the airline industry profited off of one of the biggest bailouts ever seen in U.S. history. This year, the airline industry as a whole received $25 billion in federal payroll support, which prohibits job cuts and requires minimum service levels through September 30th. A quick look at the calendar shows that time is running out and may have already run out by the time you hear this episode. So the airline industry is bracing for imminent job cuts as air carriers and their unions plead with Congress to extend coronavirus-related aid before Thursday, and the prospect looks dimmer by the day. We know that air travel nearly flatlined in March as the beginning of the pandemic, and it's gradually ticking up, but passenger volumes remain down by more than 65%, according to data from the Transportation Security Administration. Without additional funding, the biggest airline carriers in the U.S. say that they will have to move ahead with their massive layoffs. Unless Congress acts, more than 35,000 flight attendants, pilots, and on-the-ground airline workers will be furloughed or laid off on the 1st, when the clock runs out on the prohibitions. Air carriers have been warning of mass job cuts since the summer, urging Congress to act, though they have been able to significantly whittle down the number of planned cuts because larger swaths of workers have taken early retirement deals, departure packages, and other forms of voluntary leave. Yet, despite broad partisan support in both chambers of Congress for further aid to the industry, lawmakers have been unable to pass additional relief as negotiations over the broader coronavirus stimulus package remain stalled. And again, this is the same story, different day. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi of California appeared to attempt to restart negotiations on Thursday of last week and move to a prepared scaled-back version of the House's stimulus bill that would likely include money for the airlines. There's no indication, however, that the package would garner support from the Republicans in the Senate or the White House. A stimulus bill introduced by Senate Republicans earlier this month did not include any additional aid for airlines. Two Republican senators, Senator Roger Wicker of Mississippi and Senator Susan Collins of Maine, introduced a standalone bill last week that would give the aviation industry a $28 billion stimulus to avoid layoffs through March, but the legislation just has not advanced. American Airlines will furlough 17,500 workers on October 1st and will lay off another 1,500. About 8,100 flight attendants and 6,100 pilots will be among those furloughs. American Airlines shares actually rose on Monday after Chief Executive Officer Doug Parker said he's, quote, confident the federal government would extend the industry's $25 billion bailout. American shares recently traded at $12.78, up 4%. The stock has dropped 57% this year, though, as the pandemic has kept travelers at home. On Friday, American said in a Securities and Exchange Commission filing that it had agreed with the Treasury Department on a $5.5 billion loan using its frequent flyer program as collateral. The airline expects to be able to raise that number to $7.5 billion. The government initially offered American $4.75 billion. TheStreet.com reported earlier in September that American Airlines would seek help from the Treasury Department, and it looks like they did. As for Parker, he said that I'm confident that the payroll aid will be extended. And he spoke on CBS's Face the Nation on Sunday and continued that there's certainly not much time left, but there's enough time. Oftentimes, a deadline like this is what's needed to get action. We're hoping that's the case. Our plan is to get Congress and the administration to come together to get a relief bill passed. There's enormous bipartisan support for it. Parker said passenger demand is picking up, and they are anticipating a 75% revenue drop in the third quarter and a 65% slide in the fourth quarter. United Airlines will furlough or lay off nearly 16,400 workers at the start of October. The furloughs include 6,920 flight attendants and more than 4,000 operations staff and technicians. Roughly 1,400 employees in management roles will be laid off. United Airlines pilots approved a plan to avoid furloughs until at least June of 2021, the company said on Monday, marking the latest cost-cutting deal between an airline and one of its biggest labor groups during the coronavirus pandemic. The Chicago-based carrier early this month said it planned to furlough 2,850 pilots starting on October 1st, when the $25 billion in federal aid that protects the airline sector jobs expires. Another 1,000 furloughs were planned for next year. It later reached a preliminary agreement with the pilots' union to reduce minimum hours, essentially spreading schedules out among pilots, and maintain pay raises, which was later approved by union members. While United CEO Scott Kirby has said he doesn't expect demand to return to more than half of 2019 levels without a vaccine, he has emphasized that the carrier should be ready to take advantage of a recovery. The deal won 58% approval from United's roughly 12,000 pilots and will make deeper cuts to minimum hours of pilots who are more junior. If airlines get additional aid, the new agreement with pilots will be paused. The deal also included another early retirement option for pilots over the age of 50 with 10 or more years experience. United shares ended the day up 5.1% at $35.94 on Monday. One cool thing about United is that they will be the first U.S. airline to roll out a COVID-19 testing program for passengers. Starting on October 15th, flyers from San Francisco bound for Hawaii will be given the option to order an at-home testing kit or reserve a time for a rapid test at the airport. The rapid testing at San Francisco International Airport is already available to airport and airline employees, It takes about 20 minutes from arrival to result and initially will cost $250. The at-home kit will be $80 plus shipping and go to a San Francisco lab for processing. Flyers will have results within 48 hours. United hopes to eventually expand testing options to its hubs across the country in cities like New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles. Delta Airlines will avoid laying off flight attendants and ground workers through the rest of the year, largely due to the fact that 20% of its workforce took voluntary early retirement or departure packages earlier this year, and 40,000 workers signed up for unpaid leaves of absence. The company is warning, however, that it currently plans to furlough about 1,700 pilots on November 1st. Southwest Airlines, on the other hand, says it has no plans to cut jobs through the end of the year. More than 4,200 employees elected to take voluntary departure packages this summer and will leave the company before the end of September. CEO Gary Kelly on Wednesday said he's optimistic that Congress can pass a national coronavirus relief package that includes airline aid, and despite a months-long impasse between lawmakers and the White House. Even without additional aid, Southwest is reluctant to further cut capacity because it could end up causing more pain for the airline, Kelly said. At a point, if we cut our flights too much, then we cut a lot of itineraries, and the revenue loss accelerates much faster than the cost cuts do. We have to strike the right balance. He said the airline is sticking with capacity cuts of about 40 to 45% from a year ago. In its recent investor update, Southwest Airlines described demand as inconsistent by region and said it would remain cautious in this uncertain demand environment. Indeed, some warning signs are emerging. Europe has experienced a big second wave of COVID-19 in recent weeks, and just in the past few days, the number of new cases reported in the U.S. has started to creep up again. It's really still too early to call if another major wave of COVID cases will rise this fall, but with so many schools and businesses reopening, it's possible. In recent months, U.S. air travel demand has been highly correlated with the spread of the virus, so a significant outbreak would be terrible news for airlines. This really just highlights the importance of Southwest's stellar balance sheet. With nearly $15 billion of cash and investments on hand and ample borrowing capacity, the company doesn't have to worry about running low on cash as it waits for the end of the pandemic and the beginning of a sustainable demand recovery. That makes Southwest Airlines a really good investment, that some people may say. So I think it really depends on each individual airline if they're going to be able to make it through the pandemic. So far, it looks like Southwest is out front, but this time is so uncertain, and with the virus doing whatever it's doing right now, I'm not going to make a call. Airline executives, lobbyists, and union leaders are still pressuring Congress to pass something to keep the aid going. And with the Supreme Court battle, with the upcoming debates, Congress has its attention elsewhere. Industry leaders have warned that the furloughs will lead to a reduction in service, and smaller communities are going to suffer. It's also going to strain unemployment benefits. The number of people facing layoffs or furloughs last week represents about 4% of the total number of workers across the U.S. who filed jobless claims during the week ending September 18th. Frustration was evident last week on a rare joint press conference on Capitol Hill with airline executives, union leaders, and a bipartisan group of lawmakers. I just can't believe that we're not able to do the right thing simply because our elected officials can't come to some sort of compromise agreement, Doug Parker, Chief Executive Officer of American Airlines, said at the press conference. We're better than that. and the people who are out there putting their uniforms on every day, keeping our country moving safely through the pandemic, they deserve our best. And honestly, I cannot agree more. I've had some, let's say, unpleasant experiences in airline travel, but those pilots, flight attendants, ticket takers, baggage handlers are really putting themselves on the front line so we can get from one place to another. And I, for one, am very thankful for that. So, yeah, this is a major way to keep our country moving, especially with the infrastructure issues that our country has. So I sincerely hope that Congress has something up their sleeve and that Washington can come up with some sort of stimulus, but I'm not hopeful. And this may mean major changes for the airline industry in general. So I am going to leave you on that thought, and I'm going to take a quick commercial break, and when we come back, I am going to give you the top 10 wealthiest boy bands of all.
Do you work in the world of marketing and advertising? Are you a media buyer or the owner of an agency? Have you been looking for a podcast to help stay on top of all the goings on of those worlds? The GSMC Marketing News Podcast is dedicated to keeping you up to date on all things concerning marketing and advertising. Get the latest marketing news, from what major businesses have planned for the coming year to the newest trends in advertising, from podcasts, digital and streaming, to the old standbys of radio, television, and billboards. The GSMC Marketing News Podcast has you covered, whether you're a marketing agent or a business trying to expand your brand.
Welcome back. Thank you for listening to the GSMC Financial News Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. In our last segment, we talked about the airline industry. And honestly, it's my sincere hope that something happens by the time that you're listening to this podcast, and we've got some sort of relief for one of our biggest means of travel in this country. But we've reached the end of our show, and longtime listeners of my show know this is when I always give you my top 10s. So we had a little bit of fun with A and her boy band knowledge. And having been a teenage girl myself, I feel like I know my boy bands. And one thing I know for sure is they are big business. I can't tell you how many sleepovers I went to and watched concert footage on VHS tapes of one of the bands on this list. So there's one thing that's constant, and that is teenage girls and their love for boy bands. And here are the 10 most successful boy bands of all time. Coming in at number 10, I've got One Direction. And they have 35 million records sold. One Direction shot to stardom in 2010 after appearing on British talent show The X Factor. They finished third, but that has not stopped them at all. All three of their albums, Up All Night, Take Me Home, and Midnight Memories, released between 2011 and 2013, have made record sales. They've sold 35 million records to date. In the UK alone, Midnight Memories became the best-selling album of 2013, selling 685,000 copies. And I have to say, I do appreciate One Direction. I'm impressed. At number 9, we've got Take That. with 45 million records sold. Take That ruled the UK charts in the 90s with their ballads and pop songs. They've had 35 number one albums worldwide. Meanwhile, 2 of their albums, Everything Changes and their greatest hits, were among the UK's best-selling albums of the decade. In 1995, however, Robbie Williams shocked the world by his surprise departure from the band. The 4 remaining members continued without him until splitting in 1996. In 2006, they reunited and released 2 more albums, Beautiful World and The Circus. They've sold 45 billion records, and I'm probably partial to Robbie Williams on his solo albums, but that's just me. At number 8, we've got Westlife with 50 million records sold. An idolized Irish band from the 90s, Westlife sold 50 million records until separating in 2012. Their accomplishments included 14 UK number one singles, plus they were recorded in the Guinness Book of World Records as the group to sell the most albums in the 21st century. The first concert of their final tour sold 85,000 tickets within 5 minutes. At number 7, we've got NSYNC with 50 million records sold. Obviously, the most famous member of NSYNC is Justin Timberlake. Emerging in 1995, NSYNC sold 50 million records until they disappeared in 2002. They performed with a host of internationally acclaimed musicians, including Elton John, Michael Jackson, and Stevie Wonder. And they may be the subject of one of my most famous financial criminals in a later episode. So stay tuned to find out. At number 6, we have Menudo with 60 million records sold. Menudo is the only Latin American group within the top 10 most successful boy bands. They were a Puerto Rican band who made their mark in the 80s. They sold 60 million records. And Ricky Martin was briefly a member of the band. They were notably popular, particularly in Latin America, and resulted in 2 films being made about them, titled Una Aventura Llama Menudo and Menudo la Película. And as a kid, I remember watching the Menudo Saturday morning TV show after the cartoons were over every Saturday morning. And yeah, they were all pretty cute. At number 5, I've got one of my favorites, Boyz II Men, at 80 million records sold. Boyz II Men are a harmonizing band from Philadelphia in the good old US of A who are known for their R&B love ballads. Their single, End of the Road, released in 1992, was their first number one hit in the United States, which was also well received across the world. It set a new record by remaining on the Billboard Hot 100 for 13 weeks. Boyz II Men have sold 60 million records. They also had a huge hit with Mariah Carey back in 1995. You couldn't go 5 minutes without listening to them on the radio. At number 4, we have the apple of my teenager heart, of my teenager's eye. Yeah, that sounds better. The New Kids on the Block. They sold 80 million records between the late 80s and early 90s, as well as winning 2 American Music Awards. They were ranked number 16 in Rolling Stone's Top 25 Teen Idol Breakout Moments. They were originally from Massachusetts in Boston, and band member Donnie Wahlberg is brother of A-list actor and 90s rapper and Calvin Klein model Mark Wahlberg, also known as Marky Mark. Now, one thing I will say about the New Kids on the Block is those poor children could not dance. They were terrible, but my little 12-year-old heart just loved them. At number 3, we have a classic. One of the quintessential boy bands in all of the history of the world, the Jackson 5. Apart from selling 100 million records, The Jackson 5 included Michael Jackson and introduced him to the world. He is probably one of the most famous music artists in history. And their career spanned from the 60s all the way to the 90s and had 3 #1 hits on the Billboard Top 100. Their music spanned across R&B, soul, pop, and disco, and captured the world. And honestly, you can't listen to I Want You Back and not be in a good mood. I just dare you. At number 2, we have the Osmonds. The Osmonds were the boy band of the 70s. It was a family adored by female fans across the world. They sold 102 million records and even had their own animated television show. They were a group of brothers from Mormon, Utah. They had barbershop songs and evolved into a lengthy career singing a variety of music. The most famous member is arguably Donnie Osmond, who is one of the youngest brothers. And I had the opportunity to see Donnie Osmond in Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat back in the 90s. And honestly, the man can put on a show. So I got to give it to him. I don't know much about the Osmonds because that was before even my time, but got to give it to Donnie Osmond. The #1 best-selling boy band in all the history of the world is kind of surprising to me. And that is the Backstreet Boys. The Backstreet Boys are the most successful boy band of all time. From Orlando, Florida, they sold 130 million records. Their first 9 albums reached the top 10 on the Billboard 2000. Their third album, Millennium, released in 1999, is the best-selling boy group album worldwide, selling 30 million copies. And while Black and Blue and Backstreet Boys' Backstreet's Back, released in 2000 and 1997 respectively, are among the top 5 best-selling boy group albums of all time. So there you have it. I think BTS is in some pretty good company here. Obviously, they're not on the list just yet, but I think part of that's due to the change in the music industry away from albums and more towards concerts and other marketing materials. But honestly, I think they're going to be on here one day. I think they're a good group and their concerts are spectacular. So we're just going to have to wait and see. So with that, I am at the end of my show. So thank you so much for listening to the GSMC Financial News Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. If you liked today's show, find me on Twitter at GSMC Financial News Podcast. Like us on your favorite podcast app and give me a 5-star review because that'll help me find more listeners like you. And with that, I am going to say goodbye. So
You've been listening to the GSMC Financial News Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type GSMC into your favorite podcast app to find all of the shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, from business news to weird news. Please subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you've enjoyed today's podcast.